So, I'm not sure what happened last time, but I've noticed, and we'll see how it is right now, that it was super shaky. And I just want to apologize for that, because although I'm not necessarily going for crazy amazing video production, I do want it to be at least watchable. So, we'll try this out, excuse me, and see how it goes this morning. So, let's see. I think last time I was rambling quite a bit about just random things that I remember from Africa. Africa is probably, so Egypt I have like one or two kind of distinct memories, but there's those big stories. Africa, there's a couple of big stories, but I remember a lot more, but it's all like jumbled up, mixed up, nothing in any kind of chronological order memories. And so, the first thing I thought I'd start with was what I remember from church. My dad started a church with a group of people, his team members there in Ivory Coast, Africa. And I remember the building fairly well. We had this huge tree outside, and this is the church that my dad started, but it had a huge tree outside that I would always climb. Sorry, the distinction I'm making there is the fact that we also went to an international church in the area, and it also had a huge tree outside that I was always climbing. So the thing about climbing trees in Africa was the trees aren't as, the branches aren't as spread far apart as they are here in the US. And so, and especially as a kid, I was a lot more adventurous and limber. And so I would jump from branch to branch and swing from the branches, like a good African kid. But I had tons of fun doing that, and I remember that quite a bit. So the church that my dad started had a tree, climbed it. I remember that also because one time we showed the Jesus film at the church, and I climbed the tree in order to watch it. It was a very Zacchaeus moment. So I remember a lot of the people, actually, that my dad worked with, specifically our team members. The Bucklands were a family. They were a huge family, tons of kids. I think they had like 6 kids, maybe. And I think their youngest was like my first crush. But they were there. Dr. Buckland was there. He worked in the hospital, but also as a missionary. I remember this other family. I forget their names. I think his name's Tim. But I just remember they were a young couple. And we would go over to their house, and they had tons of stuffed animals. I don't know why I remember that, but they have tons of stuffed animals. I'm trying to think of who else was on our team. Those are the 2 main people I remember. I remember friends of my dad who were connected with us. I'm pretty sure they were connected through Wycliffe, which is funny because, again, that's my wife's extended family's background as far as missions. And they were a fun family. I think they were from Poland or something like that. But their son's name was David, and my first name is Jonathan, and so we became best friends, and it was always the joke that David and Jonathan were the best friends. So that is all the people I can remember as far as our team and people we're connected to. I remember one of our first people who came to know the Lord. His name was Muhammad, who I believe eventually became the pastor of the church. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm friends with him on Facebook. And I remember him quite vividly, different times when he was studying for preaching with Dad. The thing about Dad that I remember the most, and I'm going to end with this today, it's going to be a little bit of a shorter video. The big thing that I remember about church in Africa was that my dad would do so many different creative sermon illustrations. And that became something that has always been important to me as I've gotten older. I've had the chance to speak and preach at different places, and it's been something where I really value a good sermon illustration. I think it's important. I think it helps communicate the message. It helps get your point across. It keeps people engaged and entertained at the same time. And so Africa was a big deal about that. Dad would do a lot of different sermon illustrations. The one I remember the most was he brought in a coffin, but it was like a child-sized coffin that he had gotten made. My dad had a lot of things made in Africa, including a paddle, because I used to get spankings. I used to get a lot of spankings. We won't go down that road right now, but I remember the coffin, and like he did his sermon illustration and then had people come put things in the coffin, probably like things that they were releasing and burying and letting go of, some sermon illustration there. But I remember that. I remember him, I think this was Africa, it might have been Kazakhstan, which that's later. I remember him having a mustard seed that he actually brought in so you could see the size of a mustard seed. I thought that was a pretty cool illustration. But illustrations from an early on time in Africa, early on age for me, were always both really important, really entertaining, and I find that they can be quite a useful tool, not just with preaching, but with public speaking, even with just friends and stories and hanging out and sitting and talking. So that's all I'll talk about for today, and we'll see you tomorrow.